So welcome everyone to this session of EPG Pathshala. My name is Dr. Ketki Ranade. I am faculty with the Center for Health and Mental Health, School of Social Work at Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Bombay. I'm going to be talking about a specific module on mental health concerns of persons with non-normative sexualities and gender expressions. Simply stated, this is a module on LGBT mental health. This module is a part of a course, a larger course on mental health. I will be speaking for the next 20 to 25 minutes on LGBT mental health, and I'll first like to start with what are the objectives of this module. The primary idea is to understand what is normative and non-normative sexualities and gender expression. The second objective is to understand mental health concerns of LGBT persons, and the third one is to understand mental health concerns of LGBT through two primary frameworks, that is the structural violence framework and the minority stress framework. Now, to begin with, we need to first understand what we are referring to as normative sexuality and gender expression and non-normative sexualities and gender expression. The normative in the area of sex, sexuality and gender is often so pervasive in social life that it gets naturalized and universalized. What I mean by that is that as a result, we are made to believe that the only normal and natural way to have sex is the heterosexual way, or rather respectable heterosexual sex is that which happens within marriage and is typically associated with reproduction. Similarly, in terms of gender, we are taught to believe that the only natural and normal gender expression is that of masculine and feminine. Anything that lies outside of this binary of man and woman is seen as not a normal form of gender expression. And any sex outside of the respectable heterosexual penovaginal sex meant for reproduction is therefore seen as unacceptable or seen as abnormal. Now, these rigid compulsions around what is expected or normative gender and sexuality produces a range of gendered and sexual others, which is the title of this particular module, that is persons with non-normative genders and sexualities. But in this particular module, what I do is I refer to one kind of a community that has been othered on the grounds of genders and sexuality. So in this module, I'll be only speaking specific to LGBT persons, and I'll be talking about their mental health concerns. So some of these sexual and gendered others that we looked at, that we are going to discuss in this module, are lesbian women, gay men, bisexual persons and transgender individuals. What do I mean by LGBT persons? Let me go into that a little bit briefly. When I refer to lesbian women and gay men, I refer to women and men who are attracted to members of their own sex. So lesbian women are women who are attracted to other women, and gay men are men who are attracted to other men. Then you have bisexual persons who are basically people who are attracted to both men and women. Then the T in the LGBT, which is one of the most neglected groups that we have not been able to talk about much, both in academia as well as in public discourse, that's the transgender. Transgender refers to persons whose gender assigned at birth does not match with their own experience, their own feeling of the gender that they experience. So basically this means that each one of us, all human beings, are born with a certain sex, and we are assigned a gender based on this sexual attribute. For transgender people, what happens is that the gender assigned to them at birth just does not work with their own experience or their feeling of their gender. So that's what I mean by transgender. Thus you may have persons who are assigned gender male or gender female at birth, and their felt gender may be opposite to the gender that they have been assigned. So somebody might be assigned male at birth, but they might feel like a woman. Somebody might be assigned female at birth, but they might feel like a man. Similarly, there are also those who are assigned female at birth and assigned male at birth who do not see themselves as fitting into this binary of male and female, and so then therefore these are transgender persons possibly who identify outside of the binary and might use terminologies like non-binary gender for themselves. They might use ideas of gender queer, they might use ideas of gender fluid for themselves, and so on. So as you can see, the transgender is also a really big umbrella within which there are various kinds of persons for whom the binary of male female does not work. So this is the group of people we are going to be talking about in today's module. Now let me briefly, before I go into LGBT mental health, introduce these two frameworks to you that I will be talking about. These are frameworks, or what we can call as a lens through which we will view LGBT mental health. So the first framework that I would like to introduce is what I call as the vulnerability and structural violence framework to understand LGBT mental health. This framework, as the name suggests, basically looks at sort of a broader structural societal attitude that tends to marginalize and makes life difficult for certain groups that are marginalized. Yeah, so we will understand what I mean by this vulnerability structural violence framework. To begin with, I am stating here that LGBT persons are victims of a range of human rights violations and denial of rights from the state, and experience violence both in private and public spheres quite a bit. The most known instances of violence are in the context of Section 377, about which there has been quite a lot media coverage, so many of you might be aware that this is a Section 377 is a section in the Indian Penal Code that criminalizes homosexuality. So Section 377 has been widely used to carry out several kinds of human rights violations in the form of blackmail, extortion, threats, beating, sexual assault of MSM, that is men who have sex with men, and gay men, as well as hijras, kotis and other transgender persons by police, as well as by general public. So there are several studies that have documented some of these kinds of violations. As you may be aware that Section 377 has a very interesting history in India, and as a result of over a decade or maybe more long campaign that happened by LGBT groups, the Section 377 was read down by the Delhi High Court in the year 2009, and in a very seminal, celebrated judgment by Justice A.P. Shah, it was stated that you cannot criminalize a group of people based on their sexuality merely on the grounds of public morality. And so Justice A.P. Shah says that constitutional morality as a principle is much larger than the idea of public morality. So he says that you may not individually like someone who's gay, you don't have to necessarily find affinity with someone who's gay, but you cannot criminalize them in a democratic country like India. So that happened in 2009, the Delhi High Court judgment. This judgment was challenged by several groups, including various religious groups, and the Section 377 was brought back in a measure which is called as a recriminalization of homosexuality by the Supreme Court in December 2013. Now what's interesting is that so in terms of the structural violence framework that I'm talking about, you have a law in the statute which criminalizes a group of people based on their sort of sexuality, sexual expressions and so on. So that's one of the frameworks that I'm asking us to look at, within which we will understand LGBT mental health. There is limited human rights literature that exists in the context of lesbian women in India, and this literature that exists is full of testimonies of forced heterosexual marriages, harassment by family, loss of jobs, having to lose place of residence, being kicked out of homes, being separated forcefully from their partners, being forced into marriages and so on, which is very common. One of the instances about which, again, the reason I want to mention this is it's a fairly one of the earliest media sort of story that received attention looking at sort of lives of lesbian women. So this is a story of Leela and Urmila. These are two police women who were serving in the Madhya Pradesh Police Department. They got married in the year 1987 in front of about 40 witnesses in a temple. And eventually the media picked up this story, and these women were labeled as lesbian, and then they were made to discontinue their service, and they were also later separated. Now this is something that has been documented in one of the PUCL, that is the People's Union for Civil Liberties report of Karnataka in 2001. So this is one of the earliest sort of expressions of public violence that we see, or institutionalized violence that we see against lesbian women and couples. More recent studies have indicated that schools, colleges, peer groups, family are common sites of ridicule and violence in the lives of gender transgressive persons, that is also transgender persons. This is a more recent study of 2015. It's a book called No Outlaws in the Gender Galaxy by Chainika Shah and others. It is a Zuban publication, very interesting piece of work looking at lives of 50 persons who see themselves as genderqueer or as transgender and who were assigned female at birth, and sort of this book kind of documents narratives after narratives in terms of the experiences of these people from in their homes, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, colleges and so on. So going forward, to talk a little more about the structural violence framework. While violations in public spheres are most visible against gay men, men who have sex with men, hijras and kotis, I am using this terminology kotis here, which is, let me just explain that in a minute. Kotis are referred to as sort of effeminate men. It's a local language terminology, so transgender might be a word that is used and we are familiar with in the English language, but kotis and hijras are more sort of locally used terminologies to refer to people whose assigned gender at birth may not work in terms of their felt gender, so in that sense as trans persons. So going back to this point I was making, that while violations in public spheres are most visible among men who have sex with men, gay men, hijras and kotis, and other transgender individuals, the domestic or the private and the familial space is one of the main sources of violation in the lives of lesbian and bisexual women, as well as in the lives of trans masculine persons or trans men. Now, studies with lesbian and bisexual women and trans persons assigned gender female at birth highlight the family as a major source of stress, sometimes physical as well as psychological violence. So, this has again been common experience of many of us who've been working within the LGBT movement, that the minute family members find out that that their daughter is in a relationship with or is sort of attracted to another woman, then this is the time when a whole lot of violence can be unleashed. What often happens is being sort of kept away in the house, mobility being restricted, the two people are not allowed to meet each other at all, and often this results in forced marriage. Similarly, when it comes to gender expression, the minute a child is sort of particularly, let's say I'm taking the example of somebody who's been assigned gender female at birth, what we often see is that if this person who's assigned female at birth is not engaging in typical feminine behaviors of clothes and dressing and hair and play and all of that, then initially it might not receive as much of wrath, and to some extent maybe she might be seen as a tomboy, and therefore there may not be an immediate reaction. But often as the child grows up a little bit, so in a pre-pubertal sort of time, what we see is that various kinds of sanctions and corrections begin to happen within family, within schools, from teachers, from other friends, neighborhoods and so on. And these sanctions sometimes can be in the sort of form of taunts and constant corrective sort of messages that are being given, but sometimes these can also be much more severe in terms of violence, in terms of being beaten up, assaults and so on. So that's the context in which I am asking us to think about mental health concerns of LGBT, that this is the larger context of social violence within which most of these lives are unfolding. The other model or the other framework that I want us to think about while talking about LGBT mental health concerns is this model that comes from within the public health discourse and has been given by an American public health scholar. His name is Ilan Meyer, who talks about what is called as a sexual minority stress model. Now, Meyer describes sexual minority stress as the psychological distress that is a result of stigma, discrimination, violence experienced by sexual minority individuals as a result of their sexuality. Minority stressors, as conceptualized by Meyer, are internalized homophobia or homonegativity that relates to gay people directing negative social attitudes that they face day in and day out, directing those attitudes towards themselves and beginning to believe about themselves what they hear being said about them. So that's internalizing negative social attitudes, that's internalized homonegativity. Then there is stigma that relates to expectations of being rejected or being discriminated against, as well as actual experiences of discrimination and violence. So Meyer talks about minority stress along these three lines: internalized homonegativity, stigma, and experiences of discrimination and violence that happen against sexual minority persons. Sexual minorities is again another term that has been used particularly in the public health sort of a discourse to refer to gay, lesbian, bisexual persons. Minority terminology has been used as opposed to the majority, compulsory, respectable heterosexuality and the more minority, marginalized homosexuality. That's how this terminology has been used. Another defining feature that Meyer talks about in terms of minority stress, he talks about three important features. One is that minority stress is unique. unique to the gay or the lesbian or the bisexual person, and hence it is additive to other general stressors that everyone experiences, and in that sense requires a response over and above the one required to cope with other life stressors. Now what this means is that all of us as individuals, irrespective of our sexuality, irrespective of whether we are minority, majority, whatever, as the in the course of living, we all experience general stresses, and we have to, as part of sort of coping, deal with these stressors in a positive way and move on. That's part of growth. Now, what Meyer is saying is, in addition to the general stressors that all, let's say, all young people go through, a lesbian, gay, or a bisexual youth will have to deal with other kinds of stressors that are unique to their particular identity. Some of the examples of the unique stressors we will take as we go along in the module. The second feature that Meyer talks about is to refer to minority stress as being chronic in nature, implying that it is relatively stable throughout life, so implying that it is related to relatively stable underlying social and cultural structures. What that means is that it's likely to not go away very soon. It's something that is going to be part of what you have to deal with most of your life, because social and cultural realities around you which marginalize persons based on their sexuality are relatively stable and they don't change. So this kind of stress is also chronic. It is socially based and stems from social processes, institutions and structures that go beyond the individual. So it's not about a particular person who might be bigoted, who might be prejudiced, but it's actually like a structural phenomenon where certain persons based on their genders and sexuality are sort of marginalized. So that's the idea of the minority stress model. Some studies have sort of looked at the minority stress model and have tried to see how this sort of affects people's mental health concerns. And one of the first ideas is that of pointing out to the extra energy that is expended examining reasons for one's sexuality and figuring out one's sexual identity while living and growing up in a heterosexist world. Now what this simply means is that while living in a heterosexist world, everyone is expecting you to be, of course, asexual as a child, and then as you grow up and pre-puberty and pubertal years, you are expected to develop interest in opposite sex. That's the idea of compulsory heterosexuality that comes from a heterosexist sort of construction of the world. What happens is, for most young gay and lesbian people, there is a lot of energy expended in trying to understand why am I different. So as I'm growing up, while everyone else seems to be interested in the opposite sex, there's something else that's happening with me. So there's a lot of extra psychic energy and a lot of extra work that needs to be done to understand your own sexuality. You don't easily see role models around you that sort of tell you that this is who you are. So often, for example, you might, as you're growing up in your school or college or among friends and so on, you may not easily find role models who are gay or lesbian, and so in that sense you have to also find your own identity. So one of the there's an interesting work done by Alpert who says that when you compare other minority groups with sexual minority groups, one interesting thing is that with other minorities, most times young children are they sort of receive the minority identity as they are growing up. So if you're, say, growing up in a black household or in a Dalit household, or you're growing up in a poor household, which are various examples of minority groups, you don't have to go and find your identity. So as a Dalit person, it's not something that you have to find who I am. You see it in your parents around you. So you have role models around you for that. But often sexual minority youth are born in heterosexual families. So in that sense, you don't have immediate role models around you in terms of your parents or your siblings and so on. And so finding your own identity, making sense of it, are often extra tasks that are unique stressors to LGB individuals as they are growing up. Maintaining multiple identities, stress involved in process of coming out, publicly identifying as lesbian, gay, bisexual. This is slightly different for transgender persons, because often coming out is something that that may be a point of huge amounts of violence in transgender lives. And what I mean by that is that for a gay, lesbian, bisexual person, it might be possible to pass as a normal person, because you might be able to fake interest in opposite sex, you might be able to fake some of these things and manage to not come out and only come out in some safe spaces. But for most transgender persons, they are quite visible because their experience sense of gender and the gender that is sort of forced upon them by society is quite different. And so very often transgender persons, so you will have the standard stereotype that you see in the media is you have this boy who is has feminine gestures, yeah. So it's very difficult for this person to hide these feminine gestures, yeah. So in that sense, coming out is slightly different for gay, lesbian, bisexual people and for transgender persons. For both, it can lead to a great deal of violence, particularly in hostile sort of environments. So going back, studies have pointed out that minority stresses of this nature, figuring out whether to come out, when to come out, familial issues, general lack of social support, some of these are sort of ideas that are linked with a gay or lesbian identity. Smart and Wagner, who are these other sort of researchers, talk about the cognitive burden that is involved in hiding and living in secrecy. So this is about what I referred to earlier about gay and lesbian people who might pass, and by passing I mean that they might learn to hide and not talk about their sexuality openly everywhere they go because they might expect violence. But in this hiding and living in secrecy, a lot of cognitive energy is sort of lost. In the Indian context, some of the gay-related stressors that have been documented include pressure for heterosexual marriage, forced heterosexual marriage is something that is fairly common both to men and women as well as to trans persons. Pressure to seek help or cure from doctors for change of sexual orientation. There have been a few studies, including some done by me, which look at how parents often tend to take their children to doctors saying that cure him, make him heterosexual, make him perfect man, a complete masculine person, etc. And then there is violence from natal families. So some of these studies talk about the common gay-related stresses. We'll move on to the next slide, which is understanding LGBT mental health concerns. Now, research findings from European and American contexts suggest that LGBT individuals are at great risk for mental health problems across developmental stages, that is across the lifespan. LGBT youth face greater number of stressful events and have access to less social support than their heterosexual peers. They are at greater risk for psychiatric disorders like major depression, generalized anxiety disorder, conduct disorder, substance abuse, suicidal behavior, sexual risk taking, and in general poor health maintenance as compared to their heterosexual peers. Studies using adult samples indicate elevated rates of, again, depression, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, alcohol use and abuse, suicidal ideation and attempts, and other kinds of psychiatric comorbidity. Now, how do we understand these figures? Like I said, that let's keep in mind the two frameworks that I talked earlier about, the minority stress framework and the structural violence and vulnerability framework. Let's look at what are the studies in the Indian context as far as LGBT mental health concerns are concerned. Few studies have focused on mental health concerns of LGBT in India as well, and these indicate that emotional and interpersonal impact of living in a deeply homo-negative, homophobic environment can be quite high. A study conducted in Bombay City with 150 men who have sex with men, MSMs, indicated that at the time of the study, 45% reported current suicidal ideation, 29% who was screened in for current major depression, and 24% for any kind of anxiety disorder. It's a fairly large percentage of psychiatric morbidities. A qualitative study focusing on experiences of 40 gay and lesbian individuals highlights a sense of alienation, sense of isolation while growing up in a culture that devalues and silences same-sex sexual desires. Another study that I mentioned earlier, the book that I mentioned, No Outlaws in the Gender Galaxy, the same study which worked with 50 queer persons assigned female at birth, indicates that out of the 50 respondents, 13 of them had attempted suicide while still living within their family at a very young age due to stigma, control and violence at home. It's a fairly high amount, sort of a figure. Similar other suicide figures, Humjansi, which is a resource book on queer rights, done as early as in 1999, documented over 30 cases of lesbian couple suicides in a period of 5 years. Deepa V, who is a lesbian rights activist in Kerala and has been documenting cases of lesbian suicides, has talked about lesbian suicides, and she says that most women committing suicide are from Dalit, Adivasi, working class, that is poor backgrounds, and have therefore been subjected to multiple kinds of discrimination. So again, here there is the point being made that I was saying earlier about structural violence is that sexuality and gender is one axis along the lines of which people might get marginalized and discriminated against. But there are several other kinds of access, and Deepa is talking about how being Dalit, being poor, being from a tribal background, being from a rural background, all of these are multiple disadvantages that might get added on to the disadvantage of being of same-sex sexual orientation or being a lesbian woman, that sort of puts people at risk for mental health problems, as including suicides. If this is the kind of mental health problems that gay, lesbian, bisexual and transgender people face, then what are the kinds of services available to them, and whether they are able to access services, whether they are able to access help of counselors, therapists, mental health professionals, health providers and so on. Some of the data suggests that there are several barriers to accessing healthcare services. LGBT individuals have reported experiences of stigma and discrimination in health as well as mental health care services. Some studies, particularly in the context of the HIV epidemic, throw light on experiences of stigma and discrimination in healthcare services, leading to avoiding or underusage of these services. One of the studies in 2007 in Rajasthan, this is a HIV related sort of site in which the study was done, HIV intervention site. This study revealed that a majority of MSM, Hijras and other transgender people in the state, both rural and urban, rely on self-medication or go to Hakims or Dais, that is traditional medical practitioners, for sexually transmitted illness treatment, as well as other general health problems, as well as for castration, emasculation or nirvan, which is one of the ritual practices among the Hijra groups, that is sort of a part of becoming a part of the Hijra community sometimes. So some Hijras undergo this ritual castration, which is called as nirvan. So this study sort of indicates that for a range of health concerns, from the ritual practice of the nirvanam to STI treatment, HIV treatment, and for other kinds of health problems, people often rely on Hakims and Dais, that is traditional practitioners, and or may use self-medication but avoid going to sort of healthcare providers due to fear of stigma and discrimination. They are reluctant to access sexual health services from government and private hospitals because of fear of harassment and a lack of sensitivity among healthcare staff and counselors. A similar study was done in Chennai where Hijras are referred to as Aravanis. So this study was carried out with Aravanis. Some of the problems with healthcare service for the Aravanis were lack of knowledge about Aravanis among healthcare providers, using of abusive language by doctors as well as nurses, being forced to stay in male wards when they identify as transgender, trans women. So being forced to be admitted to inpatient male wards, as well as being mocked at by other patients. Some of these were sort of barriers to accessing services. Similarly, in mental health practice, a similar kind of heterosexism and homophobia has been observed among mental health professionals in India. Studies with mental health professionals in India indicate that several of them continue to use really old, outdated, no more seen as scientific methods for curing homosexuality, such as masturbatory reconditioning, aversion treatments, using mild shock, as well as hormonal treatments. Now, these have been documented. Some of this is also my work, but also has been documented by others. And these methods have been internationally criticized as being both unscientific and not being of any efficacy, but also on ethical grounds, that people who are homosexuals are made to go through these kinds of unpleasant, fairly uncomfortable, undignifying kinds of treatment experiences. In fact, the Jogjakarta principles, which are principles that apply international law to gender and sexuality questions, describe any form of treatment that is aimed at cure or change of sexual orientation as a form of medical abuse, not just unethical, but actually as a form of medical abuse. But some of these practices continue to exist in India even now. So these are some of the barriers to accessing services. Now, what is the need then, as far as LGBT mental health is concerned? There is a need for LGBT affirmative services. There is an urgent need for developing affirmative models of health and mental health care. LGBT affirmative approach actually refers to healthcare which would include modifications in existing practice to incorporate issues and stressors that are inherent in living as a sexual minority in a heterosexually constructed world. Here, the definition that I'm using here is about actually LGB affirmative approach, but transgender affirmative approach would also mean sort of existing models of care that exist and assume the binary of man and woman, but being able to go beyond that and being able to provide services to transgender persons. There has been extensive work done in the American and the British context by American Psychological Association and British Psychological Society, who have established gay affirmative counseling practice guidelines, gay affirmative and trans affirmative practice guidelines. In the Indian context too, I myself have developed some guidelines for affirmative counseling work with gay, lesbian and bisexual clients. These currently are not incorporated in the mental health professions training in India, and there is a strong need to be able to incorporate both the issues of LGBT and their mental health within our training, and then affirmative approaches to be able to respond to these kinds of mental health concerns of these marginalized groups. So in this module, what we learned in the last maybe about 25 to 30 minutes is basically to understand who is the LGBT community, what are some of the main social structural problems that are currently facing the LGBT community. We also understood how is it that social and structural barriers and social and structural problems can affect people's mental health, and we use the minority stress model to understand the linkage between being a sexual minority and how that affects mental health of persons. And then we went a little bit into understanding Indian studies and studies abroad in European and American contexts to understand how being LGBT can affect people's mental health, and we sort of tried to understand a little bit on prevalence of certain kinds of disorders and problems like suicide and so on. Finally, we sort of concluded with looking at if LGBT people are more at risk for mental health problems, do they have access to good services and good quality health and mental health services? And we tried to identify some of the barriers in accessing quality mental health services and quality health services. And we concluded by saying that there is an urgent need for developing gay affirmative and trans affirmative models to healthcare and to mental health care. Thank you.